what a great piece you published today in the information. I do want to get to what the crux of your argument is, but I thought maybe a good place to start is give us sort of copyright 101. I mean, how do copyright standards work right now for traditional artists? Talking about musicians, filmmakers. Let's put AI aside for a second. We'll get there. How does it work generally?
Sure. Yeah. Look, it's based on this idea of human authorship, right? So if you as a human and an author can create and can express and can prove that what you've created was inherently human, then like you can copyright it. And I think that the medium on which it happens, it's kind of like a second aspect of that creation process. And so for photography, for jazz, for any form of expression, that's how we've evaluated and thought about copyright for forever. And so what we're kind of like advocating here, and we'll go deeper into it, is basically AI really doesn't change that formula, and it should be held in the same standard as any other art form, basically.
Got it. And so you're saying that, hey, copyright standards, the way they traditionally worked, is that you have to be able to prove that you made it. And the argument that you're making is that it doesn't really matter what technology you use to make it. This is just the latest tool, essentially.
Correct. And I think part of it is really understanding what AI is at its core. I think a lot of the assumptions and decisions as to how we interpret AI when it comes to copyright have been based on what we've seen AI do over the last, I would say, 3 years, 2 years. Now, it's really important to understand that when you think about media and AI, think about video generated with AI models and images and music and multimedia formats, you're seeing highly creative forms of expression, right? These are not machines that just create on their own. There are people behind the systems. The systems are there for advocating for artists. They're there to augment a specific creative process. But the ones initializing, starting that creative process are artists first and foremost. And so if artists are the ones communicating via this medium, then artists should hold their rights to anything they create.
Right. So I do want to get into some of the nuances here, but very quickly, I mean, you have tons of users using your platform right now to using AI to generate multimedia content. Has this been a big issue for them?
It has. I think it's important to recognize as well that it's going to expand as use cases and usage continues to grow. We have tens of millions of users. We expect to get to hundreds of millions of users. I think broadly AI video will become probably the most important modality of AI over the next couple of months. I mean, you're seeing this. Everyone is really betting a lot in video as a both a reasoning kind of engine, but also as an art and a creative kind of system. And so we should expect even more pressure on how we understand and think about copyright in the age of AI. And so really, we want to make sure we can help guide and understand and have a bit of nuance in terms of thinking of this technology as a very powerful medium of expression and make sure that discussions don't get lost in simplifications or generalizations.
So the interesting part here is you're talking about the content that's the output of people using AI to create this art. The question I have for you is, what about all the data and all the content that goes into training these models? I mean, how do you sort of square your argument that, hey, you should be able to copyright the output with the fact that there's a lot of potentially copyrighted work that is being used? I'm not talking about your company specifically, but I'm just generally speaking, right? There is a lot of this content that's used to train these models in the first place, right?
Yeah, so those are two different, totally different kind of like questions. One has to do with the argument of fair use that I think the courts are going to be basically deciding very soon. I think there's arguments on both sides. I'm very optimistic on the fair use because I think this is transformative at its core. What people are using and creating with AI is totally new and different from anything we've seen in the past. And these models are learning patterns around the world. Now, on the copyright, on the output side, that's the question I think that's most important. And I'll give you basically a good example of how this conversation has moved now. And the focus has moved to outputs. The studios that we work with, the production companies that we work with, the Hollywood companies that we collaborate with, the argument, what they care the most about the outputs. It's about how do you make sure that you can make something and then like have the rights to either copyright it or use it in perpetuity. And that's really important. And that has no change whatsoever with the technology itself. It's just you should be the one owning that because you as a human created it.
And one question I did want to ask is you talked a lot about video content. That is the business that you're in your piece. What about stuff like, I don't know, spoken word poetry that you can just use an LLM for, with ChatGPT? I mean, does your argument extend to that and saying, hey, I use this tool to write a poem, but I want to copyright that? Like, is that as far as we're going with it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. In a way, we have artists using chance. Surrealism has been experimenting with non-conscious ways of creating for years. And so if you take away the kind of like method of creation and just focus on what was the intention, what was the control of the person or the human created it, you can still create it. Like this conversation has, in a way, nothing really to do with AI, but also everything to do with AI, because like we've forgotten that some of the core ideas of how you create with systems that are autonomous. I mean, John Cage, one of the greatest artists of the last century, embraced chance for all of their like most of his work. Of course, he owns the copyright for that. He didn't control every aspect of the process of creation. And in the same way that if you do that in a LAM, you might feel similar, right? But you are the one picking up and selecting and inputting specific parts to get the outputs that you need.
Right.
And so in a way, it's kind of a reminder of to go back to like I think how we always look at the world and in terms of copyright.
Right. Well, Chris, it was a great piece, and I encourage everyone to read it in the information. The part that we didn't get to discussing that I encourage people to read about is you do go into detail about how other countries around the world are treating this issue. And so I do recommend everyone go check out the op-ed. Again, that is Runway CEO Cristobal Valenzuela, the CEO of Runway.